Hello everyone, welcome to the first spotlight in August 2026. Okay, so let me see. We're actually going to be changing something really big. So, well, by the way, there was no spotlight last week, and there was a reason for that. A big reason. So this is what's happening. We have been presenting good stuff and interesting stuff on our spotlights and our YouTube channel, but also mostly on our FARSIGHT'S.com. But we've been fighting with a hand behind our back. So that's mostly all finished now, but it's been a real struggle. So we decided to tell everybody what's going on. And we decided to tell everybody what's going on a weekly basis, because we have a huge backlog of content that we have to publish. And it took us a long while to be able to get to the point where we can do that. But what you need to understand is that the world is changing fast. And there's a ton of stuff that's happening to us, as well as to the world, that we simply can't talk about on YouTube. It just can't. It just can't be done. So we're going to break our spotlights up into two things. We're going to have our normal spotlight that we have like right now. It'll be like always, which is great, but it's going to have an extended version after this. And the extended version is going to be called Farsight Secrets. That's right, Farsight Secrets. And that is going to be available only on the extended version on FARSIGHT'S.com. So you're going to get your normal spotlight here, but the extended version, that segment at the end, is going to be it's going to be an extensive segment. We have lots to tell you every week. It's called Farsight Secrets. And Farsight Secrets, for those people who say, oh, you're putting it behind a paywall, you can't do that. Look, folks, what we are going to tell you every week in Farsight Secrets, which is at the second half of the spotlight, it simply cannot be told to you. It cannot be told to you on YouTube, period. It can't. You can't know it that way. The only place we have to tell you is our own streaming service, FARSIGHT'S.com. And we're going to start telling you everything that's happening behind the scenes, because we think you have a right to know. So get your spotlight here if you want, but you also get the same spotlight. Actually, the edited version, everything's all tidied up on FARSIGHT'S.com, but also you get Farsight Secrets at the end. And we're basically telling you about a war that's going on right now. And it's huge. It's huge. And you don't know anything about it. But it is huge. So we're going to be talking about that afterwards. But right now I want to talk with you about something that we've been starting. We have 2 episodes up now. And it's called our Sovereign series. So we are expanding into new video things that we're doing. You see, we have a zillion projects up on FARSIGHT'S.com, but we want to be able to make movies about those projects as well, not just showing you the remote viewing data, but showing you movies about that. And the first step in that is to do what we call visual novels. Graphic novels are things that were done with the old manga days, with, paper comics and things like that. Visual novels are the same, but they're on YouTube and they tell a story. So what we're doing with our visual novels is telling a story based on what we saw with our remote viewing data. So the setting is real, the events are real, the plots and the characters are fictional, but that type of thing happened just the way we're showing it. So it brings to life that thing. So that is called the Sovereign series, and our second episode is up now. And I'm going to show it to you actually in just a little while, but I want to cover a few things first. The first is that I don't want to we're totally non-political here in the sense that we do not side with any party or any president or any presidential candidate. We're totally neutral in that. We look at it all with a neutral look. However, it's become clear that, now remember, I'm a professor in political science at a major university, but I'm not using that to boost up what I'm saying now. What we do at Farsight doesn't have anything to do with what I do at the university, where I teach statistics, and I also teach elections and things like that, but modeling as well. But the point is, I don't do anything that we do at Farsight at the university. At Farsight, we study all of these things, and we have known that basically the world is coming apart slowly but surely. Well, there's economic stuff, there's political stuff, and there's war-related stuff. So it looks like the Iran conflict between the United States and Iran is sort of coming to a conclusion. Now, that doesn't mean it may not pick up and get big and blow up again. But it looks pretty clear that the United States has lost that war. It just has lost it. Like Vietnam, Afghanistan, some could actually say Iraq as well. We had to get out of Iraq and things fell apart. It's really hard to conquer anybody by bombing them. Bombing never works. The only way you can actually conquer some place is to invade with ground troops and completely occupy the place. And the United States is not going to be doing that. There was talk about wanting to capture an island and things, but they finally realized they can't. Well, it looks like the United States has run out of ammunition. That's what it looks like. And insiders inside Washington, D.C., even out of the White House, are struggling with ways to sort of reframe it. But it's just looking really clear that the United States has lost that struggle. Now, again, it may pick up again, but it doesn't look, like it's any type of victory anytime soon. So we're heading into an election season right now. And the last thing a president wants is a wartime defeat right before a midterm election. That's not good. So there's got to be some other way to distract things, and a sort of a big issue coming up. So one of the things that may be coming to life in August, I know in fact behind the scenes there are people pushing for this. I thought it would happen in the third week of July, but they didn't take that timetable and act on it. It would have been the perfect week, the third week of July. But I think they know that they can't wait till September and October, because that's the midterm elections as you're in the heat of the campaign. So my understanding is there are people in the White House that are pushing really hard for some type of disclosure comment. One thing I've heard is that one suggestion that actually was made to President Donald Trump is to make the disclosure comment not as a big announcement with a speech, but rather as a casual comment, say on Air Force One, when he's walking around the jet and he goes back where the news people are and they ask him questions about various things, and he just leaves a casual comment about, that we have non-human biologics and a crash retrieval program and stuff like that. And that's, 1 minute. That's it. And then walks back to the front of the jet and leaves it. And that would be a trigger event, which would come out with a cascade of other stuff. But that might be the disclosure moment. So we don't know. I just do know that people are pushing for it inside the White House. And the main reason is, some people really want disclosure. Donald Trump Jr., for example, I understand is really in favor of disclosure. However, I think other people in the White House are saying that's a good big distraction issue to get us away from the war so that we can talk about something positive and try to reframe it that way. So if it's going to happen, it really should happen latest possible is August. If it happens in September, it's what? It's right in the middle of the election campaign. It's like, that's not a good time to actually have a new major thing where you're trying to put a focus on what you're doing. August is a very low news month. Typically not much happens in August. So July and August are low news months. So anyway, so I just want to let you know that that's being talked about in the highest places. And we'll just have to wait and see what's going to be done. But because the because the Iran war is not going well and it looks like it's headed towards a military withdrawal from the United States, they're probably looking for something else. If they don't do anything, they're just going into the election cycle with a lost war, and that's terrible. So it really does look like there's pressure building for disclosure this month. Let's wait and see. There's also a huge amount of pressure against it. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in the Farsight secret segments. But that's real data that I have for that in the secret in the Farsight secrets segment. And so I can't talk about that right now, but I will talk about it later. All right. So that's it. And by the way, Entisam has been doing a live stream every month on remote viewing. She's a great teacher in remote viewing. And this is not a paid announcement of any type whatsoever. She's just a friend, and she came out with this Third Eye Quest remote viewing training thing, and it's really great. It's got a whole bunch of cards, and they're really manufactured perfectly well, and it's a way for people to do probing with a zillion targets. And she's got, you know, a big collection here. So I mean, she has all types of targets: big targets, small targets. Some of the small targets are like a feather, okay, like a feather and things like that, probing that. Some of the big targets are like Yellowstone National Park, stuff like that, like Yellowstone National Park, things like that. And there's zillions of them. So it's a really good thing. I'm really pleased that Farsight has gotten a bunch of really talented people together that are doing things. And again, they're doing this on their own. We don't get a cut. This is not a paid announcement. This is just something that she's doing. And it's the Third Eye Quest, and it's on Amazon. So I'm really grateful that people that we work here with at Farsight are really talented and doing these extra things. Okay, and other people are getting other things geared up and going, okay? All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about the main topic of today, which is the thumbnail that you saw on this spotlight, which is the other side of the war. So we had a project called The War in Heaven. And last time we came up with the first episode of this thing called the Sovereign Series. The Sovereign Series will not always be about the war in heaven. It'll go off on different topics, but it'll always be related to real remote viewing data that we have done. But we did a big project on the war in heaven, and that was a war between two planets. Mars was one, and a planet called Maldek, another. And Maldek was blown up. Now, for those people who say, no, you can't blow up a planet, it was blown up. Now, the major astronomer who promoted that idea was this guy, okay? Thomas van Flandern, okay? And he wrote some articles about this, and this is his book. Now, Thomas van Flandern, he was a professional astronomer, big time, and he was he was head of his Department of Celestial Mechanics at the Naval Observatory. So he was a big mainstream astronomer. And he used to argue with his colleagues all the time about how the asteroid belt clearly came from a planet that exploded. And they said, you can't do that. You can't explode a planet. Listen, folks, there's tons of evidence. And if, Thomas Van Flandern has some articles that he's published that just focus on listing the evidence. But in the book also, he's really talks a lot about that as well. But here's just some of there's a ton of evidence, but here's just a couple things. Asteroids are big and hard, and they're rocks. And like the Ceres asteroid, well, that's a big one. And like you don't get a big rock from the primordial dust that was left over from the creation of the solar system. You need a gravity source that sucks everything in and compresses it, makes a rock out of it. And some people have said that there's not enough mass in the asteroid belt to make a planet. And Thomas Van Flandern talks about that as well. Most of it was blown out of the system. It was a really big explosion. And that's where the comets came from. The asteroids have clear evidence of being exposed to extreme heat, melted rock on the surface. There's all types of evidence, and Thomas Van Flandern, the astronomer, he goes through all that. It was never accepted by the mainstream, but the mainstream didn't really have a good explanation for a whole bunch of things, including that. And, I mean, just remember, it was the mainstream astronomy up until 1995, which was not that long ago, said that there were no other planets around any other star system in the whole universe, let alone the galaxy. I swear they did that. They were teaching that in courses, college courses. It was they talked about that. They said that the configuration of making a planet is so unusual and so odd, it just doesn't happen. Yet they had that was not a scientific statement. That was a religious type of statement, but that's what they were saying. They didn't want to acknowledge that there were other planets, because then you'd have to acknowledge there's life on other planets. And they didn't want to go there. So, but at the time, the only thing they could do scientifically is statistics. And they had a sample of one solar system. And the only thing you can do is the mean, because you don't have inferential statistics. Inferential statistics is if you know something about one variable, you can then know about other variables. They had only one sample, so they didn't have other data. But that was this solar system, and this solar system had 9 major planets, an asteroid belt, comets, meteors, everything is up there. You can't then say that no other planets were around any other star. That's crazy. If you do not have other data, you can only talk about the mean. That's descriptive statistics. Anyway, so that changed, of course, in 1995 when they discovered the first evidence of a planet around another star. Now, of course, these days it's 2 or 3 planets a week they're discovering. But back in those days, which was not long ago, it was 1995, they didn't say that. And that was crazy. Well, mainstream astronomy and mainstream physics and mainstream everything, they say a lot of things that are just nutty. And the mainstream goes along with it. Anyway, so the War in Heaven project had 2 sides. Now, we focused on the Mars side, what happened with the War in Heaven and how the planet was blown up. But when we show it in that project, then you really need to go to farsightprime.com and watch that project, the War in Heaven. We focused mostly on what was visible in Mars because they had the rain of fire. So the first episode of that was the rocks that came from Malda exploding, hitting the Martian atmosphere and hitting Mars, and that's what ruined Mars. Half of Mars is fully cratered, and the other half is pretty much without craters. So obviously something happened on one side when the planet exploded. And Thomas Van Flandern also talks about, this is evidence that there was a shock wave that blew stuff over the entire solar system, and that's what caused the great spot on Iapetus, the moon of Saturn. I go into that on another time. But anyway, so what we have here is an attempt by us to not only show the remote viewing data, but to show the story about what happened after that. So the first episode was episode 1, which is The Reign of Fire, and that dealt with the thing on Mars side. And it has a fictional plot in the side, but it's in the classic visual novel way of doing it. But the events are real. And the second one just came out this week, and that's called, well, you can, that's called the End of Maldek. And that's the other side. That's the other side, what happened to them, because they had ships. They were attacking Mars, and then Mars retaliated and blew up the entire planet, because they were losing the war. So they had a last desperate thing of just blowing up the entire planet. Now, people that say, well, you can't blow up on a planet. Yes, you can. You can easily blow up a planet. Take Earth, for example. Earth is a 8,000-mile diameter ball of liquid molten rock with an 8-mile thin crust over that. Okay, so if you just go into any place where they have a stockpile of nuclear weapons, I've heard Scandia Labs has such a stockpile. I mean, there are places where they have stockpiles of nuclear weapons. And you just put a missile in there and blow it up and detonate the entire bunch. What you're going to do is pop the balloon. You're going to pop the balloon. This is a balloon. This planet is a balloon. And it'll just fragment and shoot stuff all over the place and blow up the planet. And that is apparently what happened with Maldek. The Martians, facing defeat, were desperate, and they shot something at the nuclear stockpile in Maldek, and that detonated the entire nuclear stockpile, and that's what caused the planet to blow up. Anyway, so I want to show you how we're doing this. On our YouTube channel, Farsight, we don't want to mix our nonfiction with our fiction. We don't want to mix our science stuff with our fiction. So we have another channel called Farsight Prime. Now, that's not our streaming service, which is farsightprime.com. It's just a channel, Farsight Prime. And I want to show you that now. So let me actually do some fancy work here on the OBS software. So I hope there's a lot of things I have to coordinate in the OBS software. Before the sky caught fire on Mars, the spark of annihilation was struck in the dark, heavy atmosphere of a neighboring world, Maldek. It was a planet of immense, crushing gravity, both physical and political. While the Martians built their cities of stone and blue energy, the inhabitants of Maldek built fortresses of jagged black steel and dark crimson power. They were a proud, ancient, and deeply militaristic species, the undisputed apex predators of the sector. For countless millennia, they had looked out into the void and seen nothing but their own reflection. They were the masters of the long dark. But a new, chaotic variable had emerged in their perfect equation, the humanoids on the fourth rock from the sun. Inside the High Command Center, buried deep beneath the black metallic crust of the capital, the political elite of Maldek stood around a massive, glowing, crimson holographic map of the solar system. They were furious. The red lines of Martian commercial and military expansion were creeping outward, stretching their supply lines, securing resources, and establishing outposts. To the political leaders, this was not just competition. It was an insult. It was an intolerable, festering threat to Maldek's absolute dominance. The humanoids were expanding too fast, breeding too quickly, and demanding a seat at a table that Maldek had owned since the dawn of history. At the head of the table stood Admiral Vrax. He was a purebred commander of the High Fleet. A towering, imposing figure in immaculate dark military regalia, his features were sharp, his jawline defined by the fine, dark, iridescent scales of the elite warrior caste. He listened to the politicians screaming about trade routes and resource deficits with cold, unblinking disdain. The politicians were cowards who fought with ledgers. Vrax fought with plasma. He didn't care about Martian commerce. He cared about power. Standing silently in the shadows behind the Admiral was Vess. She was breathtaking. She did not possess the heavy, brutalist features of the military caste. Her form was soft, alluring, and flawlessly feminine, her skin woven with fine, smooth, iridescent scales that shimmered beautifully in the dim crimson light.
She wore sleek, form-fitting dark silk that perfectly traced the elegant sweeping curves of her body. To the politicians, she was merely the Admiral's beautiful consort, a prize point blank. But Vrax knew the truth. Vess was one of the most brilliant strategic minds on the planet, and unlike the arrogant men screaming in the war room, she had actually spent time living among the humanoids on Mars. The Supreme Chancellor slammed his heavy fist onto the edge of the holographic table, shattering the silence. "The time for observation is over, Admiral." The Chancellor barked, his voice a harsh, guttural rasp. "The humanoids are establishing a heavy munitions grid on their northern ridge. If we allow them to solidify that perimeter, they will hold the entire inner sector hostage. The Council demands a decisive, absolute military operation. We strike now. We break their back before they can stand." Admiral Vrax did not flinch. He slowly crossed his heavy arms over his chest, a cold, arrogant smirk playing at the edge of his mouth. "The humanoids are insects. Chancellor, they build walls of stone because they are afraid of the dark. My Crescent fleet can burn their entire perimeter to glass in a single solar cycle. If the Council authorizes the strike, I will not just break their back. I will erase their sky." The Council roared its approval, the heavy metal doors of the war room sliding open as the politicians rushed out to finalize the war decrees. The room emptied, leaving only the Admiral and Vess alone in the glow of the red hologram. Vess stepped out of the shadows, the soft rustle of her silk echoing in the quiet room. She did not look triumphant. She looked terrified. She reached out, her delicate, iridescent fingers resting gently on the dark fabric of the Admiral's uniform. "Vrax," she whispered, her voice a soft, beautiful melody that commanded his immediate attention. "You must listen to me. The Council is blind, but you cannot afford to be. Do not launch the Crescent fleet." Vrax looked down at her delicate hand resting against his chest, and then up into her dark, captivating eyes. He let out a low, rumbling laugh that vibrated deep in his chest. "Are you afraid of the humanoids, Vess? The creatures who dig in the dirt?" He reached up, his large, clawed hand gently stroking the side of her face, tracing the smooth, shimmering scales along her jawline. "They are soft. They have no natural armor, no deep history of conquest. They are children playing at war." Vess pulled his hand away, her grip surprisingly strong. She stepped closer to him, closing the distance until she was looking directly up into his eyes. "You don't understand them," she pleaded, the desperation in her voice cutting through the quiet of the war room. "I lived among them. Vrax, I watched them build those cities. They are not like us. We calculate, we measure risk and reward. If a battle is lost, we retreat. We survive. But the humanoids, they are driven by something completely irrational." She turned and pointed to the glowing red projection of the Martian planet hovering between them. "They are driven by emotion, by attachment, by an absolute, terrifying stubbornness. They are extreme risk-takers. If you back them into a corner, if you threaten the things they love, they will not surrender. They will not calculate the odds of victory. They will risk everything. They will risk total mutual destruction just to ensure you do not win." Vrax sighed, turning his back on her. He walked slowly toward the massive, reinforced viewport at the far end of the room. Outside, suspended in the dark, heavy atmosphere of Maldek, was his armada. Hundreds of colossal, crescent-shaped warships hung in the sky, their weapons arrays glowing with a dull, terrifying red heat. It was the greatest assembly of military power the sector had ever seen. The sheer, overwhelming destructive capability of the fleet was intoxicating. It was absolute. "You have spent too much time among the soft things, my love," Vrax said, his voice echoing off the glass. "You have let their weakness infect your logic. They can be as stubborn as they wish. A stubborn insect still burns when you apply the plasma." He turned back to face her, his expression hardening into the cold, ruthless mask of the Supreme Commander. "The politicians are right about one thing. The humanoids are a plague, and tomorrow I am going to sterilize the fourth planet." Vess stood perfectly still by the holographic table. She knew it was over. The hubris of the military caste was a gravity well she could not pull him out of. She had seen the Martian engineers. She had seen the heavy, desperate, frantic energy with which they built their defensive grids. They knew Maldek was watching, and she knew, with an absolute, chilling certainty, that the humanoids had not just built shields, they had built a spear. "You are going to kill us all, Vrax," she whispered to the empty room as the heavy vault doors slammed shut behind him. The launch of the Crescent Fleet was a spectacle of terrifying beauty. Millions of tons of black, jagged steel ripped through the heavy atmosphere of Maldek, leaving trails of burning red plasma in their wake. They moved with the cold, synchronized precision of a predator closing in on its prey. To the citizens of Maldek watching from the surface, it was a display of ultimate, unquestionable supremacy. The war was already won in their minds. The fleet was merely traveling to deliver the execution order. On the bridge of the flagship dreadnought, the silence was absolute. The massive room was bathed in the harsh, crimson glow of the tactical screens. Admiral Vrax stood at the helm, his heavy hands clasped behind his back, his eyes locked on the expanding blue sphere of the Martian homeworld in the distance. He felt no anxiety. He felt no doubt. He felt only the cold, mechanical anticipation of the strike. Vess stood quietly in the background, her arms wrapped around herself. The sleek silk of her clothing seemed inadequate against the sudden, freezing chill she felt settling over the bridge. She watched the blue planet growing larger in the viewport, her heart pounding with a slow, sickening dread. The fleet crossed the void and entered the Martian atmosphere without breaking formation. The humanoids' perimeter alarms screamed, but it was too late. The Crescent ships did not bother to secure the orbit or demand surrender. They simply opened fire. Massive, searing beams of red-orange plasma rained down from the heavens, striking the sprawling cities below. The heavy stone and reinforced steel of the Martian towers vaporized instantly, reduced to ash in the blink of an eye. The destruction was absolute. It was exactly as Vrax had promised. He was erasing their sky. On the bridge, the tactical officers reported the casualty numbers with cold, mechanical efficiency. Millions dead in the first strike. The primary energy grids were collapsing. The capital city was entirely gone. Vrax smiled, a cold, triumphant expression settling over his sharp features. He turned slightly, looking back over his shoulder at Vess. "You see," he said softly, "the insects burn. There will be no mutual destruction today." But Vess was not looking out the viewport. She was staring at a secondary tactical screen in the far corner of the bridge, her beautiful face drained of all color. While the primary screens tracked the destruction of the cities, this screen was tied to the deep space telemetry arrays left behind in Maldek's orbit. A single, massive energy spike had just registered. It didn't come from the Martian perimeter defenses. It came from a deep subterranean silo, miles beneath the burning surface. It wasn't a defensive weapon. It wasn't designed to shoot down the Crescent ships or protect the dying cities. It was a single, massive, experimental kinetic spear. It rocketed out of the hidden subterranean silo, tearing through the burning atmosphere so fast it bypassed the Maldek blockade entirely. It didn't aim for the fleet. It aimed for the void. Vess ran forward, the soft silk of her robe snapping around her legs. She shoved past a tactical officer and grabbed the edge of the central holographic table. "Vrax!" she screamed, her voice cracking with terror. "Look at the telemetry! Look at the trajectory!" The Admiral turned, his triumphant smile fading into an expression of profound annoyance. He looked down at the hologram. A single, glowing red line was streaking across the solar system, moving at a speed that defied the laws of known physics. It was completely ignoring the battle. It was heading straight for their home world. "It's a stray," Vrax dismissed, waving his heavy hand, a desperate, blind shot into the dark. "It will burn up in the outer atmosphere of Maldek." "It's not a stray!" Vess screamed, tears of absolute panic welling in her dark eyes. She tapped the console, zooming in on the target coordinates. "It's not aiming for a city. It's aiming for the primary core, the planetary nuclear stockpile. Vrax, if that kinetic mass hits the core at that velocity, it won't just detonate the stockpile. It will crack the tectonic plates. It will ignite the mantle." She looked up at him, The horrifying reality of what the humanoids had done finally settling over her like a shroud. The Martians knew they couldn't win the orbital war. They knew their cities would burn. So they had calculated the absolute maximum amount of pain they could inflict in return. Vess gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the man she loved. The man who had just doomed their entire species. "I told you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I told you they were extreme risk-takers. They are willing to kill us all." Vrax stared at the hologram. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of doubt crossed his sharp features. But the hubris of the apex predator was too deeply ingrained. He could not accept that the insects had outmaneuvered him. He slammed his fist onto the console. "Nonsense, woman!" Vrax roared, his voice echoing over the bridge. "Those humanoids cannot defeat us! The planetary shields will hold!" The planetary shields did not hold. The Martian spear hit the surface of Maldek with the kinetic force of a small moon. It punched through the heavy atmospheric crust, bypassed the automated defense grids, and buried itself deep into the primary nuclear stockpile buried within the planet's mantle. The explosion was utterly silent in the vacuum of space, but the visual violence was absolute. Maldek didn't just burn, it shattered. A blinding, terrifying flash of pure white light erupted from the core, followed immediately by a massive, expanding wave of crimson fire. The entire planet, billions of years of history, the towering black cities, the ancient vaults, and billions of souls were vaporized in a fraction of a second. The sheer kinetic force of the explosion sent a silent, rippling shockwave through the very fabric of space. Maldek was gone. In its place was a violently expanding cloud of planetary debris, massive chunks of superheated rock and molten core hurtling outward into the void. On the bridge of the flagship, the blinding white light of their murdered home world flooded through the viewport, instantly maxing out the visual dampeners. Vrax threw his arms over his face just as the shockwave hit the fleet. The massive dreadnought was violently tossed like a toy in a hurricane. Warning sirens screamed as the black metal hull buckled under the immense kinetic pressure. Consoles exploded in showers of lethal sparks. Officers were thrown to the deck, crushed by falling debris as the gravity plating failed. The hubris vanished, replaced instantly by the raw animal instinct to survive. Vrax lunged across the tilting, sparking deck. He grabbed Vess by the waist, pulling her violently against his chest and throwing them both beneath the heavy structural arch of the primary bulkhead, just as the ceiling collapsed in a shower of twisted steel and sparking cables. He wrapped his massive, heavily scaled arms completely around her, shielding her fragile body from the destruction of his own ship. The mighty commander of the High Fleet was reduced to a desperate, cornered animal, clinging to the only thing he had left in the universe. The violent shaking eventually stopped, replaced by the ominous groaning creak of stressed metal and the hiss of leaking oxygen lines. The emergency lights flickered, casting long, bloody shadows across the ruined bridge. The dreadnought had survived the shockwave, but it was critically, perhaps fatally, damaged. Vrax pushed the heavy steel debris off his back with a guttural grunt, pulling Vess up from the floor. She was trembling violently, her beautiful silk robes torn and covered in soot, but she was alive. They walked slowly, unsteadily, toward the massive cracked viewport at the front of the bridge. They looked out into the void, where their home had been, where the heavy, dark planet of Maldek had dominated the night sky. There was nothing but a massive, slowly expanding ring of molten rocks, flaming debris, and dust. An asteroid belt born from the corpse of their civilization. The greatest military power in the sector had been utterly erased. Vess stood perfectly still, her hands resting against the cracked glass. Tears streamed silently down her face, cutting clean tracks through the soot on her shimmering scales. She didn't say, "I told you so." There was no victory in being right. There was only the crushing, infinite emptiness of total extinction. She looked at the glowing embers of her home, her mind unable to process the scale of the slaughter, her species, her history, Her entire world was gone. Vrax stood beside her. He looked at the asteroid belt, the grave of his arrogant pride. For a long moment, the Supreme Commander felt the terrifying weight of his failure. He had underestimated the humanoids. He had pushed them into a corner, and they had bitten the hand that squeezed them, poisoning the entire body. But the grief did not last. In the mind of the apex predator, grief is a useless emotion. It was rapidly, violently consumed by a cold-blooded, absolute hatred. He turned to Vess. He reached out, his heavy, clawed hand surprisingly gentle as he wiped a tear from her cheek. He didn't offer apologies. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He offered the only thing a military commander knows how to give. He offered a target. "What do we do now, Vrax?" Vess whispered, her voice hollow. "We are ghosts. We have nowhere to go." Vrax looked past the burning ruins of Mars, his eyes fixing on a distant, small, blue-green sphere hanging in the dark closer to the sun. "We will resettle," he said, his voice a low, terrifying promise that echoed through the ruined bridge. "There is another planet nearby, a primitive world. It will take time to conquer the beasts that roam its surface, but we will make it ours." He placed his hand on the cracked glass, staring at the distant Earth. "And when the humanoids eventually follow us there, we will not try to destroy them. We will enslave them. We will wrap their minds in a quarantine so deep they will forget they ever touched the stars. They will never, ever threaten us again." The story you just heard is fiction, but the war was real. The exploding planet of Maldek, the creation of the asteroid belt, the clashing extraterrestrial armadas, and the subsequent enslavement and psychic quarantine of Earth are hidden in ancient religious texts, suppressed histories, and global mythology. We know because we looked. Discover the actual, blind remote viewing data that uncovered the true war in heaven and learn the real history of humanity's ancient past. See the evidence. Visit FARSIGHT'Prime.com.
All right, everybody. So, I managed to get the thing working that I had before, which is what I wanted to show you, which is how to get that. Before I do that, let me just tell you that Aziz, my son, he's like a remote viewing version of Graham Hancock. He goes into these deep archaeological, anthropological mysteries. He's got a master's in international relations, but he's also, from memory, got a degree in anthropology with a focus on archaeology, and he's been on digs and everything. So he's really big in this type of thing, and he's been going through all types of the myths and trying to say what was the reality behind these myths. And so one of the projects he came out with was the first episode is Prometheus the Fire. It's the Prometheus myths. What was that really about? Well, it was actually, it really wasn't. It was a story that really happened. There was a guy, and there was a conflict between two leaders, Zeus and this guy Prometheus. And the story eventually became mythology and parts of ancient religions and things like that, but it really happened. So the second part of the Prometheus thing is called Prometheus the Punished. And that's going to be released in a few days this week on FarsightPrime.com. So that's a major mysteries thing. And as you can see, we're really heavily involved in high-end movie making stuff. We've got a lot of stuff that we've done over the last year to increase our production rate to catch up with all of our mysteries projects. And those things are finally coming to fruition. But anyway, this thing that you just saw, which was the end of Maldek, is an example of a sort of a visual novel type of thing. Now I want to show you about our YouTube channel. This is a different YouTube channel. We have two YouTube channels. One is just called Farsight, and the other is called Farsight Prime. So here is our regular YouTube channel. Okay, if you go down to the bottom of our regular YouTube channel, which is Farsight, you'll see a link to Farsight Prime. Now that's not our streaming service, FarsightPrime.com. It's a second YouTube channel that it's been there for a long while, but we weren't posting anything on it. But now we are. So if you click on that, you go to Farsight Prime. And then if you look down, you'll see the 2 episodes down here on which is the Reign of Fire, which is the one that we released first, which is the Mars side of this. Again, these are dramatic visual novels that sort of bring this stuff to light. And then the one that you just saw was the second one this year. The one that's first in line, which is episode 2, which is the story of Maldek. That YouTube channel, Farsight Prime, is where we're going to be putting up our fiction stuff. And not all of the fiction stuff. A lot of the fiction stuff is these dramatic novel types of things are going to go up on farsightprime.com, our streaming service. But we want to let the general audience know that we're doing this type of stuff also, as well as our mysteries projects. And again, the next major mysteries project is coming out in a few days. Aziz is finalizing it now, and is Prometheus the Punished. It's amazing. And you'll see it's all very high-end movie making. So we really dramatically, it's not just watching people doing remote viewing like a lot of people just show themselves drawing on a piece of paper and a pen. I mean, we are really trying to bring this to you in a way that is entertaining to watch, but it's real. Okay, so the visual novels that we're doing, like you just saw, they're based on the real remote viewing sessions. We do not, it's never totally fiction. The setting is exactly as the remote viewers saw it. But then we put a plot in the middle of it, and that's for that one. Now, for those of you who say, it's just not possible, I've already told you about mainstream astronomer Thomas Van Flandern, who said Maldek was a planet and it did blow up. Well, there's another mainstream science guy, he's a PhD, named John Brandenburg, and he used to work at Sandia Labs in New Mexico as official government scientist. And he wrote a bunch of books, but one of them that's very interesting is this one, okay, which is Death on Mars. And one of the interesting things is he talks about the meetings that he had in Sandia Labs where they were talking about the readings that they were getting from the landers that they were landing on Mars. And it clearly indicated that there had been nuclear explosions on the surface of Mars. So this book goes into that, the Death on Mars, and he's an authentic scientist with a PhD that did work at Sandia Labs. He worked at some other places as well, but that's the reason he worked at Sandia Labs is I'm mentioning that is because that's where he had the meetings where they went through this and they saw that. And when they were showing the nuclear isotope readings coming out in the atmosphere, his eyes popped open and said, "What?" Because the nuclear isotope readings that they were showing when the collected data only happen in the context of nuclear explosions. Well, that story that you just saw, End of Maldek, that was what they were doing. They were destroying the entire surface of Mars. They were nuking it. And the people of Mars said, we have no alternative. We got to do something. So they shot a missile at the nuclear stockpile, blew up the whole damn planet. Now this also matches with our Aliens on Iapetus project, where the shock wave that went throughout the entire solar system hit Iapetus. Now Iapetus is the moon of Saturn, and it's an icy moon that's tidally locked in the orbit around Saturn, so it held still. And the shock wave hit it, boom. And so that's it. Now the Aliens on Iapetus project that we did, that's really interesting because it talks about in a very rich society where transportation around the solar system was not a big deal. They didn't use like rockets. And they were the rich and famous. They had a hotel, a resort on Iapetus. It was one of the most beautiful scenes on the entire galaxy. Imagine, you're on Iapetus. Saturn is in the sky with the rings. I mean, the rich and famous used to go there and meditate and do stuff. They had a hotel. It was a big deal. anyway, when the Maldak was destroyed, the explosion went throughout the whole solar system, throwing ejecta out all over the place. Well, it hit Iapetus. And the story of what happened to the people that were at the hotel is the Aliens on Iapetus project. So we have so many interesting projects that we want to bring to life, but we want to have people going back and look at the remote viewing data so that they say this is all done under totally blind conditions. It's quite clear that remote viewers did not know what the targets were or anything about the project, and they all come up with the same corroborating stuff. Statistically, that's very powerful. So anyway, that's that. So let me actually check the time. We've been actually going for about an hour. So let me actually wrap up now. But this spotlight is being recorded on a camera. Okay? You're watching it on YouTube live, but I'm also recording it on a camera. Now what's going to happen now is that I'm going to turn off the live stream, but I'm still recording it on the camera. So the edited version that's going to be going up on FARSIGHT'S.com is, I'm looking at some of the settings on here on the thing. Yeah. So anyway, the edited version that's going up on FARSIGHT'S.com is going to contain the stuff that happens after I turn off the live stream. And that's called Farsight's Secrets. And I have stuff, every week I'm going to be telling you the backstory. I have stuff I'm going to be telling you that is just astounding. And it's all being hidden from you. There's a war going on behind the scenes. And we finally decided, hey, you know, if people are going to be fighting disclosure and governments holding off and things like that, we're going to be telling you what's going on. And behind the scenes, the battles are huge. And so anyway, so I want to thank you all for watching, and this is great. I love you all. It's been really great. I'm going to turn off the live stream now and continue recording. And this new section is called Farsight's Secrets. And you can see the rest of the live stream with Farsight's Secrets. Probably it'll be up tomorrow, maybe late tonight, on FARSIGHT'S.com. And listen, for those of you who are going to complain, they're putting it behind a paywall. No, there is no way I can tell you what I'm going to tell you on YouTube. So there is no way. We have to show you the rest on Secrets on FARSIGHT'S.com. And that's going to be a regular feature of our spotlights. We'll have a regular spotlight, and then we're going to have Farsight's Secrets after that. The whole thing on FARSIGHT'S.com. But the Farsight Spotlight, the normal one, goes up on YouTube. I hope I see you all at FARSIGHT'S.com for not only this, but for the secret side. Okay? All right, everybody. I will be back next week. And by the way, I'll explain why I wasn't here last week when you see the secrets thing. Okay? All right, everybody. I will see you here next week. Same time, same place. And love you, and see you then, okay?